She signed the divorce papers without a single tear. He thought that meant she was fine. He was wrong. 3 years later, the woman he discarded walked back into his boardroom. Not as his wife, not as a victim, but as the one person his entire empire needed. And she was keeping a secret that would bring the most feared man in New York to his knees. If this story hits you somewhere deep, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Stay until the end, because nothing about this is what you think it is. The rain came down the way it always did in late October. Not gently, not dramatically, just relentlessly. The way New York itself came down on people who had already lost everything. It hammered the windows of Hargrove and Lind Legal Associates on the 42nd floor, and the sound of it filled the silence of the conference room like white noise filling a church after the sermon ends and everyone realizes they have nothing left to say to each other. Serena Vega sat with both hands flat on the table. She wasn't gripping anything. She wasn't shaking. She had decided 3 days ago that she would not shake, would not cry, would not give anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching her come apart. She had practiced in the bathroom mirror of her cousin Danny's apartment until her face stopped doing the thing it kept trying to do. That crumbling around the edges that happens when the thing you built your entire adult life around turns out to have been made of paper the whole time. The attorney on her side of the table, so a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tie that was slightly too short, slid the document toward her. He had explained it 3 times already. She didn't need it explained again. She understood perfectly. The prenuptial agreement she had signed at 22 years old in a hotel suite in Monaco, slightly dizzy from champagne and completely drunk on the idea that a man like Kang Min-jae had chosen her, was ironclad. The word ironclad had been used 4 times in this meeting. She was counting. No claim to shared assets, no spousal support, no stake in any of his legitimate corporations or holdings. She would walk out of this marriage exactly as she had walked into it, with nothing except the clothes she came with and the small silver bracelet her mother had given her before she died, which Minji had never once asked about and therefore had never thought to take. She picked up the pen. Across the table, Kang Min-jae sat in the way that powerful men sit when they have already moved on from the conversation happening in front of them. He was in a charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for his body, shoulders wide, posture perfect, both forearms resting on the table with the loose ease of a man who has never once in his life worried about what came next, because he has always been the one deciding what comes next. He was 34. He was, objectively, the most physically striking man Serena had ever seen in her life, with the kind of face that made people look twice. Not because it was pretty, but because there was something behind it that felt like standing at the edge of something very deep and very dark and being unable to fully look away. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his phone, tilted at a slight angle on the table beside his right hand, and she understood in this moment, completely, finally, without any remaining room for doubt, that she had never once in 3 years of marriage fully understood what she was to him. Not until right now. Now that she could see it clearly. She was an item on a schedule. She was a box being checked. He had places to be after this. She signed her name. The attorney gathered the papers. There were handshakes. There were quiet professional words exchanged between the attorneys, 2 men who would go home tonight and eat dinner and not think about this room again. Min-jae stood, buttoned his jacket, and finally looked at her. A single, brief glance. The kind you give a door you're closing. And then he walked out. That was it. 3 years. A wedding in the Maldives that had been featured in 2 luxury lifestyle publications. A penthouse apartment on the Upper West Side where she had learned to cook the Korean dishes his grandmother used to make, spending entire Saturday afternoons in the kitchen trying to get the ratio of doenjang right while he took calls in his office. A life she had built entirely around someone who had apparently never once considered it a life at all. She sat for another 40 seconds after he left. She knew she was counting because her chest needed those 40 seconds to restart properly. Then she stood up, straightened her coat, thanked the attorney, and walked out of the building into the rain without an umbrella. She had left it upstairs on the chair. She didn't go back. The subway ride to Danny's apartment in Washington Heights took 47 minutes. Serena spent the first 20 minutes staring at her own reflection in the dark window across from her seat, watching her face do nothing, making sure it kept doing nothing. The man sitting next to her was asleep with his mouth open. A kid at the far end of the car was playing a video game with the sound on too loud. Life was continuing at full volume all around her, and that struck her as almost funny. Not ha-ha funny, but the other kind. The kind that sits at the back of your throat and doesn't quite make it all the way out. Danny was awake when she got there. Danny was always awake. She was 29 and worked the night shift dispatch at a logistics company and kept the apartment at a temperature that Serena had decided was approximately 4 degrees too warm, and there were always 3 or 4 mugs of half-finished tea distributed around the living room because Danny always made tea when she was anxious, and she was always anxious. She was also, Serena had come to understand in the past 2 weeks since she'd shown up at her door with one suitcase, the single most decent human being she had ever known. "How'd it go?" Danny said. Not a question. She already knew how it went. "Fine," Serena said. "You're soaked." "I know. I know. Thank you." She went to the bathroom, peeled off her coat, hung it over the towel rail, looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes. Brown, almond-shaped, with the slight downward tilt at the outer corners that her mother used to call sad eyes, and that Mean Jay had called beautiful on exactly 2 occasions and had never mentioned again. Her hair was wet and flat against her neck. She looked like a woman who had just signed away 3 years of her life in a room full of fluorescent lighting, which was exactly what she was. She pressed both palms against the edge of the sink. 6 days later, she took a pregnancy test. She had been telling herself it was stress, late period, disrupted sleep, nausea that came and went without pattern, all of it explainable, all of it attributable to the implosion of her entire existence. Nothing to do with the last time she and Min Jae had been in the same room together as husband and wife before the lawyers got involved. That had been 8 weeks ago. A night that had started as an argument and ended in the way their worst arguments sometimes ended. That particular kind of exhausted, wordless reconciliation that feels like intimacy until the morning, when the argument is still there waiting at the foot of the bed and the intimacy has dissolved like something that was never quite real. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in Danny's apartment with the test face down on the tiles, and she counted to 3 minutes by watching the second hand on her phone. And when she turned it over, the 2 lines were so clearly, unambiguously there that she actually laughed. A single sharp sound, nothing behind it. Then she sat there for a long time, not laughing. The first thing she felt, underneath everything else, underneath the terror and the disbelief and the specific particular horror of the timing, was something she couldn't fully name. Something that was not joy exactly, but was in the neighborhood of it. A small, stubborn, inconvenient warmth in the center of her chest that had no business being there given the circumstances and that she could not, despite everything, entirely extinguish. She was going to have a baby. The second thing she felt following about 30 seconds behind the first was absolute certainty about what she was not going to do. She was not going to call Min Jae. She sat with this decision for the rest of that night, turning it over, examining it from every angle, looking for the place where it stopped being the right call. She didn't find it. She thought about what it would mean to pick up the phone. She thought about his attorneys, the same ones who had made sure the prenup was ironclad, turning their attention toward custody arrangements. She thought about what it would look like for a child to grow up inside the orbit of a man who ran criminal networks across 3 eastern seaboard ports, who had people in his organization who hurt other people as a matter of professional routine, who had looked at the woman he married one final time and seen a box to be checked. She thought about what her child would inherit from that. Not the money, the other things. The coldness, the sense that people were useful or they weren't. No. She turned the test over again, looked at the 2 lines, then wrapped it in tissue and buried it in the bottom of Danny's bathroom trash. Then she washed her hands, went to the kitchen, made tea she didn't drink, and began to think about what came next. What came next was brutal. She had $1,700 in a personal checking account that Min Jae didn't know about. Money she'd saved from the small stipend she'd been given for personal expenses, kept in a separate account at a different bank, not out of any advanced planning, but because some instinct she hadn't fully understood at the time had told her to keep something for herself. $1,700. In New York City. Pregnant. With no apartment, no employment history worth mentioning, and a resume that had a 3-year gap that could only be filled with the phrase, "I was the wife of a man you might recognize," from federal indictment rumors, and I decorated our home very nicely. She found a waitressing job in 4 days at a diner in Morningside Heights that paid cash plus tips and didn't ask questions. She found a second job 2 weeks after that cleaning apartments for a service that worked the Upper East Side, which required her to take 2 trains and walk 6 blocks, and arrived at a particular sharp irony she didn't let herself linger on: cleaning the apartments of women whose lives, from the outside, resembled the life she had just exited. She registered with a temp agency for marketing and admin work. She set an alarm for 5:15 every morning and did not once, allow herself to hit snooze. Danny let her stay for 4 months. Danny refused to take rent. Serena left cash in the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter every Friday regardless, and Danny spent it on groceries and called it even. It was the most functional arrangement of Serena's adult life. The pregnancy was harder than she'd expected and easier in ways she hadn't anticipated. The nausea was vicious through the first trimester, the kind that didn't restrict itself to mornings but showed up throughout the day, at random, on the subway, in the middle of clearing tables, while she was standing in someone else's kitchen trying to figure out the eco setting on a dishwasher she'd never seen before. She learned to keep crackers in her apron pocket. She learned to breathe through her nose when the smell of garlic hit wrong. She learned that the human body has a remarkable capacity to keep going when it has a reason to keep going, and she had a reason, and so she kept going. She started the baking almost accidentally. Danny's birthday fell in the middle of Serena's second trimester, and Serena, who had no money for a gift worth giving, spent a Sunday afternoon trying to recreate a lemon layer cake she half remembered from a photograph in a lifestyle magazine she'd paged through in a waiting room somewhere. The first attempt was structurally compromised. The second attempt was edible. The third attempt, made at 11:30 at night after Danny had gone to bed, after Serena had spent the day on her feet and should, by any reasonable measure, have been asleep herself, was extraordinary. Danny ate 2 slices for breakfast and then called her friend Priya and told her about the cake. And Priya, who was planning a bridal shower for her sister the following month, called Serena and asked if she did custom baking. And Serena, who had not previously thought of this as something she did, said yes. She charged $250 for a 3-tier cake decorated with pressed edible flowers and hand-piped ombre frosting that she taught herself from YouTube videos over 3 nights. Priya's sister cried at the bridal shower. Priya left a review on a neighborhood app. 2 more inquiries came in within a week. Serena sat at Danny's kitchen table at 1 in the morning, with her hands still faintly dusted in powdered sugar, and looked at the number in her bank account and thought about something for a long time. Then she opened a new document on her laptop and started writing things down. Luna was born on a Wednesday in early March, in a hospital room that Serena had arranged, paid for, and coordinated entirely on her own. The labor was 14 hours. Danny was there for all of it, holding Serena's hand with a grip so tight it left marks, crying harder than Serena did, which Serena found both ridiculous and deeply comforting. When the nurses placed Luna on her chest, a small, furious, perfect person who immediately stopped being furious and simply looked at Serena with an expression of absolute evaluative concentration, like she was deciding something, Serena felt the world reorganize itself around this new center of gravity. Luna had Serena's nose, Serena's mouth, and eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm, light gray with depth behind them, with a quality of stillness that Serena recognized and looked away from quickly, the way you look away from something that hurts. She named her Luna because it was the name she had always wanted if she ever had a daughter, back when having a daughter had seemed like something that would happen inside a life with a structure to it. She didn't attach a middle name for 3 days, and then she chose May, which had been her mother's name, because her mother had been a woman who survived things and deserved to be carried forward. Luna May Vega. Not Luna Kang. Not Luna anything else. Serena. The first 6 months after Luna were the hardest period of Serena's life, and Serena had had a fairly thorough education in hard periods. She moved into her own apartment when Luna was 2 months old, a studio in the Bronx that was small and had a radiator that clanged in the night and was hers in a way that nothing had been hers in a long time, which made the clanging easier to tolerate. She worked when Danny could watch Luna, and during the hours Luna slept, which in the early months were unpredictable and brief, following a schedule that seemed to be determined by some internal algorithm that Serena could not crack. She was tired in a way that went past physical into something almost philosophical. She understood tiredness as a permanent condition of the landscape, like weather. But the baking orders kept coming. The event inquiries started. She did her first full event, a birthday party for a corporate attorney's 10-year-old, held in a Tribeca loft, when Luna was 4 months old, leaving her with Danny from noon until midnight and calling to check in 4 times. The party was immaculate. The attorney posted photographs on her social media. The photographs got shared. Something was being built. Serena did not have a name for it yet. She was too close to it, too inside the daily grind of it, too occupied with keeping all the plates spinning to zoom out and see the shape of what was forming. She just kept moving. She kept showing up. She kept taking the inquiries, doing the work, teaching herself the things she didn't know from books and videos, and the hard experience of getting things wrong and doing them again. By the time Luna was 8 months old, Serena had turned down a full-time marketing job at a mid-sized firm because the math, when she laid it against the trajectory of the event work, had stopped making sense in favor of the full-time job. That was the moment she registered the business. Velvet Crown Events, LLC. She sat at her kitchen table with Luna in the bouncy seat beside her and read the confirmation email 3 times. And Luna watched her with those serious gray eyes. And Serena said, out loud, to no one, or possibly to her daughter, "Okay, we're doing this." They were doing it. They did it. The next 18 months were the kind of period that, from the outside, looks like a sudden explosion of success, and from the inside feels like an 18-month exam you are somehow passing while simultaneously running on 3 hours of sleep and eating most of your meals standing over the kitchen sink. Velvet Crown Events grew from Serena's laptop to a small office to a 4-person operation. She hired an assistant coordinator, a graphic designer, a part-time social media manager. She built relationships with venues, florists, caterers, and luxury brand sponsors by showing up consistently and delivering work that was better than what she promised, every time, without exception. Luna started walking at 11 months and talking in full sentences by 18 months, and developed, somewhere in her 2nd year, an absolute fearless ease with strangers that Serena watched with a complex mix of pride and private alarm, because ease with strangers was not a quality she fully trusted, having once had quite a lot of it herself. Luna also had, unmistakably, her father's eyes. The gray was distinct enough that Danny, who was the only person who knew the full story, had commented on it once, carefully, and then not again. Serena looked at those eyes every day and kept them in the category of things she had decided about and did not revisit. The decision was made. Min-jae was not part of this. He did not deserve to be part of this. She had weighed this from every angle in the early hours of 100 Nights and come to the same conclusion every time, and she was not going to unwind it now. Not when they were building something, not when Luna was thriving, not when the life she was constructing looked nothing like the life that had been dismantled in that conference room 3 years ago and was better, was actually better, even though it was harder. She was not going to unwind it. She was working. The inquiry came through the business email on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, 2 months after Luna's 2nd birthday. Standard corporate event inquiry format: company name, event type, proposed date, general scale of the project. Serena got 20 or 30 of these a week and had a process for filtering them, a set of qualifying questions her assistant Meg sent as a standard follow-up. But this one had been flagged because the budget figure was not a figure she typically saw in a Tuesday afternoon inquiry. It was the kind of number that meant serious vetting, serious logistics, serious everything. The company was listed as Axiom Group International. Serena did not, at first, recognize the name. She looked it up on her second screen while eating a late lunch, reading through the press releases and the LinkedIn company page with half her attention, the other half on the quarterly spreadsheet she'd been working through. Axiom Group International, a holding company with significant interests in luxury hospitality, logistics technology, and commercial real estate. 3 recent acquisitions. Aggressive growth profile. Based in New York, with additional operations in Seoul, Chicago, and Singapore. She got halfway through the Wikipedia entry before something snagged in her peripheral attention, and she went back and read the board composition more carefully. Founder and executive chairman, Kang Min-jae. She put down her fork. She read it again. Then she pulled up the Google image results, and there he was, in a press photograph from a charity gala 6 months ago, in another charcoal suit, older by 3 years, somehow even more composed, with the kind of collected stillness that photographs very well and means absolutely nothing about the inside of a person. She sat for a moment with this information. Then she picked up her fork, finished her lunch, and called Meg. "The Axiom Group inquiry," she said. "Send the qualification questions." "Already did," Meg said. "Got a response back in about 11 minutes. They want to schedule a call." "Book it," Serena said. "This is a big one," Meg said. "This could be—" "Book it," Serena said again, calmly, and hung up. She sat in her office afterward in the specific silence that happens after a decision has been made that cannot be unmade. She thought about it for exactly as long as she needed to think about it, which turned out to be about 8 minutes, and then she thought about what she already knew. Min-jae was not involved in the day-to-day operations of an entity the size of Axiom Group. Corporate events were handled by executives and their teams. The inquiry had come through standard channels. This was, in professional terms, a significant contract with a high-profile client, and she had built Velvet Crown into a company that could execute it flawlessly. And if she declined it out of personal history, she was making a business decision based on fear. And fear was the one operating principle she had decided. In that bathroom in Danny's apartment with a positive pregnancy test in her hand, she was no longer going to organize her life around. She was not afraid of Kang Min-jae. She was not afraid of this contract. She took the call the next morning with 2 of her coordinators and Min-jae's head of corporate events, a poised, efficient woman named Joanna Park, who spoke in precise sentences and clearly knew exactly what she wanted and was evaluating Velvet Crown against at least 2 other firms. Serena was at her best in these calls. She was clear, specific, creative under questioning, and good at reading what a client needed before they fully articulated it. The call was 45 minutes. It ended with Joanna Park saying they would be in touch within the week. They were in touch in 2 days. Velvet Crown Events had been selected as the lead events firm for the Axiom Group's AGI Horizon launch, a public-facing brand event described in the contract materials as the company's largest corporate launch in its operational history. Proposed venue: a grand ballroom at a midtown hotel, capacity for 800 guests, dual event structure spanning a formal dinner and a next morning investor breakfast. Comprehensive scope: decor, catering coordination, entertainment, brand installation, press logistics, social media activation. The budget was the largest single contract in Velvet Crown's 2-year history. Serena signed the contract. She briefed her team. She built the project plan. She moved through the first 2 weeks of pre-production with her usual precision, communicating with Joanna Park's team via email and brief calls, receiving approvals on concept presentations, managing timelines. She did not think about the fact that he was somewhere in the building behind all of this. There was no reason to. This was a corporate event. She was a vendor. She had a job to do. The first in-person client meeting was scheduled for the 3rd week of the project, a boardroom walkthrough, Serena and her lead coordinator presenting the full visual concept to the Axiom Group's senior team. Joanna Park's office, 45th floor, Axiom Group headquarters, Midtown. Serena dressed deliberately that morning, not to impress and not to provoke, to feel like herself, which was a different calculation than either of those. She wore a deep burgundy blazer over a silk blouse, dark trousers, heels she had owned for 2 years and broken in properly. She wore her hair down. She had Luna's daycare drop-off at 7:30, and Luna had been in a phase of particularly extended goodbye negotiations. But this morning she had released Serena's hand at the door with the particular regal ease of a child who had somewhere to be herself, which made Serena simultaneously proud and slightly bereft in the way Luna was increasingly capable of making her feel. The Axiom Group offices were the kind of offices that made a point of being exactly what they were. Enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, minimal furniture, art on the walls that was expensive enough to be unmistakable without being showy about it. The receptionist was young and efficient and offered water or coffee with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been doing this for years. Serena accepted water. Her coordinator, a meticulous 28-year-old named Paula, had the presentation boards and was reviewing her notes on her tablet with the focused calm of someone who did not fully understand what they had walked into, which was exactly how Serena wanted it. The conference room was large and had a long oval table and a view of the city that on a clear November morning was genuinely spectacular. Joanna Park was already there with two other members of the corporate events team, and they shook hands and exchanged the usual warm professional pleasantries. And Serena was in the middle of setting the context for the opening concept presentation when the conference room door opened. She knew before she looked up. She knew from the quality of the silence that entered the room half a second before the person who caused it. She had spent 3 years learning what that silence felt like. She looked up. He had stopped just inside the door. He was in a dark suit, not the charcoal, something darker, and he looked like someone had hit a pause button on every habituated expression his face had learned to produce over the past 3 years and left him with just the original, unmanaged response, which was, for a full 4 seconds, something she did not have a clean name for. It moved across his face and was controlled before it finished arriving, and then his face was exactly what it always was. Composed, contained, unreadable to anyone who didn't know the specific grammar of it. But Serena knew the specific grammar of it. She had spent 3 years studying it. Joanna Park, in a tone of carefully calibrated professionalism, said, "Ms. Vega, this is Kang Min Jae, our executive chairman. He wanted to sit in on today's presentation." Serena looked at him across the length of the conference table. She felt, in sequence, the impulse to leave, which she did not follow. The impulse to let her face show something, which she also did not follow. A deep, settled, specific resolve that was not coldness, but was its own kind of quiet strength, something she had built over 2 years of mornings that started at 5:15, over every shift, every cake at midnight, every contract, every choice she had made on her own. She extended her hand across the table. "Mr. Kang," she said, "thank you for making time. Let me walk you through what we've built." His hand took hers. His grip was controlled. His eyes were not. And Serena began her presentation. She was, as she had always been in front of a room, exceptional. She spoke about the concept with clarity and vision, walked through each design element with the confidence of someone who had conceived it from scratch and understood every decision behind it. She answered questions precisely. She made Paola feel included. She never looked at Min-jae directly for longer than the half-second of professional eye contact that courtesy required. She was aware, the entire time, of exactly where he was in the room. The meeting lasted 70 minutes. Joanna Park and the team were satisfied. She could read the approval in the specific ease that settled over the room by the final quarter of the presentation. Min-jae said almost nothing. 4 sentences, maybe 5, all of them brief and operational. Nothing that required her to respond to him as anything except a vendor in front of a client. When it was over, she gathered the presentation boards, said the correct things, shook the correct hands, and walked out of the conference room with Paola at her elbow. She did not look back. In the elevator, Paola exhaled and said, "That went really well." "It did," Serena said. "He barely said anything. The chairman just kind of watched." Serena said. "Is he always like that?" Serena looked at the elevator doors and thought about a very specific answer to that question. "I don't know him," she said, which was, she had decided, entirely true. The woman who had known Kang Min-jae had signed her name on a piece of paper 3 years ago in a conference room, much like the one she had just left, and walked out of that room and kept walking. And what had been built in the time since had been built by someone else, someone who knew things the previous version of her had not known, someone who had learned them the hard way and intended to keep them. She stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, through the glass doors, into the cold November air. She had a gala to build. She had a daughter to pick up at 5:30. She had a life. 3 floors above the lobby, in a corner office with the same spectacular view, Kang Min-jae stood at the window with his phone in his hand and had not moved in 4 minutes. His assistant had knocked twice and been waved away both times without him looking toward the door. He was staring at the street below. Somewhere in the movement of people on the sidewalk, a woman in a burgundy blazer had disappeared into the crowd. He had watched until he couldn't distinguish her from anyone else. He had not known, when Joanna told him this morning that the events firm was ready to present, that the name on the contract meant anything more than a name. He had not been involved in the vendor selection. He rarely was for this category of spend. He had walked into that conference room planning to spend 40 minutes and leave early. He had seen her face. 3 years dissolved as if they had not happened. He pressed one number on his phone. It rang once. "Yeah," said the voice on the other end. Low, careful, a voice that was accustomed to being called for specific things. "Serena Vega," Min Jae said. His own voice was very quiet. "I need everything." A pause. "How fast?" "Now," Min Jae said. He ended the call. Outside, the city moved at its full volume below him. He didn't hear any of it. He was thinking about a face he had been certain, somewhere in the past 3 years, that he had successfully stopped thinking about. He had been wrong about that. He was beginning to understand that he had been wrong about a number of things. He just didn't yet know how wrong. Batik. The file arrived at 11:47 that night. Min Jae was still in his office. He had canceled 2 calls and a dinner reservation and had not told anyone why, which was not unusual. He canceled things without explanation regularly enough that his staff had stopped asking. But the quality of his silence tonight was different, and at least 2 people who had worked for him long enough to know the difference had made a point of staying out of his immediate orbit. He opened the file on his laptop, not his phone. He wanted the larger screen. He wanted to see it clearly. His head of private intelligence was a man named David Seo, who had worked for Min Jae for 7 years and who had, in that time, delivered information about competitors, politicians, rival organizations, and on 2 occasions, people who had been actively planning to move against Min Jae's operations. David was thorough, was discreet, was not given to commentary or editorializing, and delivered his reports in a clean, structured format without drama. The report on Serena Vega ran to 11 pages. Min Jae read the first 3 pages the way he read most operational documents, fast, scanning for the structural facts, building the framework before the details. Divorce finalized October 14th, 3 years ago. Left the shared apartment that same week. No forwarding address registered with the building. Took up residence with a cousin, Danielle Reyes, Washington Heights. Employment records. 2 cash wage positions beginning within 3 weeks of the divorce. A cleaning service and a restaurant. Freelance marketing contracts sporadically through the following year. Then Velvet Crown Events, LLC, registered 22 months ago. Business address in the Bronx, relocated to a commercial office in Midtown 14 months ago. Revenue trajectory that David had pulled from a combination of public filings and less public sources, annotated with a clean graph that Min Jae spent approximately 30 seconds looking at before looking away because it said something he didn't want to look directly at yet. He kept reading. Page 6. The report continued into personal details in the way that personal detail sections always did. Residence, associates, routine. And then, without particular emphasis, in the same clean formatted text as everything else, one line that Min Jae read, and then read again, and then sat with, motionless, while the city lights held steady outside his window. 1 dependent, female, Vega Luna May. Date of birth, March 8th. Age, 2 years, 8 months. He sat with this for a long time. The arithmetic was not complicated. He ran it anyway, twice, as if a second pass might alter the result. It did not. The divorce had been finalized in October. Luna May Vega had been born the following March. 5 months. Serena had been, he calculated again, sat back, pressed his thumb into the space between his brows. She had been pregnant. When she sat across that table, when she signed those papers, when he looked at her one last time like a door he was closing and walked out of the room to get to his next appointment. She had been pregnant with his child and she had said nothing. He turned to the last 2 pages. David had included photographs, standard surveillance style, taken from a distance, nothing invasive, a parking lot outside a daycare center, a neighborhood park in the Bronx taken on what looked like a late weekend afternoon, the light amber and low. In the park photograph, Serena was crouched beside a small girl who was examining something in the grass with the total concentration of a 2-year-old confronting an interesting rock. The girl's back was to the camera in most of the shots, but in one, she had turned toward whoever was on the bench behind them, her face caught clearly in 3/4 profile. Min Jae looked at that photograph for a long time. He knew his own face. He had looked at it in a mirror every day of his life. He knew the specific angle of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the particular quality of the gaze that his own mother had once described as like looking at someone who is calculating the distance between 2 points. The little girl in the photograph was looking at something on the bench, a bag, maybe, or a toy. with an expression of precise, evaluative focus. She had his eyes. She had his coloring and his bone structure along the jaw and his specific gravity of expression on a face that was otherwise entirely her mother's, round and open and human in the way that Min Jae's had never been. She was 2 years old. She had been in the world for 2 years and 8 months, and he had not known she existed. He closed the laptop. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with one hand braced against the glass and thought about his own father, which was not something he did voluntarily and was not something he permitted himself to do at length. He thought about what he had decided, at 16, standing in a hospital corridor that smelled of disinfectant and bad institutional coffee, that he would be. The specific counterimage he had constructed. The things he had promised himself he would never become. He thought about how it turns out you can keep a promise for 20 years and then keep none of it in a single afternoon without ever fully understanding the moment it happened. His reflection in the window looked back at him. He had nothing useful to say to it. He called David. "The photographs," he said when David picked up. "The park one. The girl's face. That's not a coincidence." "No," David said. He didn't ask which photograph. "I didn't think it was my place to say." "You thought correctly," Min Jae said. "I need the daycare location, her routine, the park she uses regularly." A pause. Brief. "I need to be careful about what you're asking me for," David said. Not cautiously. David did not do cautious, but with precision. "I'm not asking you to approach her," Min Jae said. "I'm not going to approach her. I need to see—" He stopped. The sentence he was about to say felt like something he would have found incomprehensible 3 hours ago. "I need to see her, my daughter, from a distance, before I decide anything." Another pause. "I'll have it to you by morning," David said, and hung up. Min Jae stood at the window for another 20 minutes. The city below didn't care. It ran its full, relentless program. Lights and traffic and the accumulated noise of 10 million people getting through their nights in all the ways that people got through nights. And he stood above it in a very expensive office with a view that was supposed to be the point of everything he'd built and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was standing on the wrong side of the glass. Serena did not sleep well that night either, but for different reasons. She was at her desk at 10:30 with Luna asleep down the hall, in the bedroom. She'd moved out of the studio into a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria 6 months ago, a decision that had felt extravagant for approximately 4 days and had since become non-negotiable. Working through the Axiom event logistics with half her attention, while the other half kept returning, with the specific dogged persistence of something she'd specifically told it not to do, to the moment the conference room door had opened. She had been fine. She was fine. She wanted to be clear with herself in the privacy of her own living room at 10:30 at night, that she had handled it well and that she was fine. She was 90% fine. The other 10% was the part that had registered in the 4 seconds before his face reorganized into its usual composition, something she had not expected to see. She had expected cold recognition, professional courtesy, possibly the particular flavor of dismissiveness that powerful men used on people they'd categorized as belonging to the past. She had been prepared for any of those. She'd had a whole train ride on the way over to prepare for those. She had not been prepared for what she'd actually seen. She was not going to name what she'd seen. Naming it was the gateway to a line of thinking she had no interest in following. She was going to finish the logistics document, go to bed, pick up Luna at 5:30 tomorrow, and continue executing the largest contract in her company's history with the same precision she brought to everything else. She closed the spreadsheet, opened the contact list for the florist vendors, and was writing an email about table arrangement specifications when her phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Checking in. "How was the meeting?" "Fine," Serena typed back. "Don't fine me." "Was he there?" Serena looked at the screen. Danny was the only person in her life who knew the complete version. The only one she'd told about the Axiom contract after she'd looked up the board composition. She told her in the same tone she used to relay logistical facts, which had not fooled Danny at all. "He came in at the end," she typed. "Didn't say much. I ran the presentation. It went well. 3 dots. Then, 'Are you okay?' 'I'm fine,' she typed. Then she looked at that word, alone on the screen, and deleted it and typed, 'Ask me again in 6 weeks when the event is done.' She put the phone down before Danny could respond. The event was in 6 weeks. 6 weeks of pre-production meetings, site visits, vendor coordination, concept refinements, and communications with the Axiom team. She could execute this in 6 weeks without Min Jae being a variable in any of it. This was possible. This was in fact what was going to happen. She would not be in the same room with him again unless there was no operational reason to avoid it. She was a professional. She was going to act like one. She was acting like one for about 8 days before it stopped being an option. The second meeting was initiated by Joanna Park, who called on a Thursday to say that the executive chairman had requested a walkthrough of the venue concept in person at the hotel that Friday afternoon. Serena absorbed this information over the phone with an unchanged expression that no one was there to see, confirmed the time, and spent Thursday evening reviewing every element of the concept presentation with the focus of someone preparing for a cross-examination. She arrived at the hotel 15 minutes early. She walked the ballroom. She adjusted 2 things about the mock layout that had been nagging at her since the last site visit. She was standing at the center of the room making notes on her tablet when Min Jae walked in. He was alone. That was the first thing she registered, that Joanna Park was not with him, that none of his team was with him, that it was just him in the doorway of a half-staged ballroom in a dark overcoat with an expression she read in the half-second before she looked back at her tablet as something considerably less composed than the boardroom version. "Where's Joanna?" Serena said. It was not quite a question. Sending her regrets, she had a conflict. "And your events team?" "Same." She put the tablet under her arm. She looked at him directly, which she had not done at any length in the conference room and which she was doing now because she had decided on her way over that looking away would be worse. "Is this a client meeting?" He looked at her steadily. It was supposed to be. And now? He moved into the room, not toward her, just into it, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the mock layout with an attention that she didn't fully believe. "You changed the east section," he said. "The flow was wrong. The sight lines from the entrance didn't land where the brand installation is." "It's better," he said. "I know." He looked at her. She held it. "Serena," he said. "If you're going to remove me from this contract," she said, in a voice that was completely level, "I need written notice through Joanna's office. We have an executed agreement with a termination clause, and I'll expect it honored. If you have concerns about the concept—" "I don't have concerns about the concept." "Then what do you have?" The room was very quiet. The hotel's ambient sound was distant and unintrusive. Whatever he was about to say, he had come here to say it, and had sent his people away to say it. And Serena understood this and had the specific sensation of a floor she'd been standing on, beginning to shift slightly underfoot. "I didn't know," he said, "about the pregnancy. I want you to know that." The air moved wrong. She kept her face entirely still. She was very good at this. She had gotten very good at this. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Yes, you do." The silence held for 5 full seconds. "You had someone investigate me," she said. "Yes." She inhaled, slowly, through her nose. She thought about 16 things simultaneously, and none of them were thoughts she wanted to have in front of him, in a half-lit ballroom, without Paola or Joanna Park or anyone else between them as professional buffer. "You had someone investigate me and my—" She stopped. "She's mine," he said. His voice was very quiet. Not a statement of possession, something she hadn't heard from him before, a register that she didn't have a framework for. "Serena, she's mine." "She is mine," Serena said. Her own voice came out harder and lower than she'd intended, ground down to something fundamental. "She has always been mine, entirely mine. I built everything she has from nothing, while you were—" She stopped again, harder this time, visibly, her jaw tight with the effort of containing what was trying to come out of it at volume. He didn't flinch. He stood there and took it in the way she had never seen him take anything, not absorbing it behind a wall, but actually receiving it, with his face open in a way that was deeply unsettling because she had no experience of it. "I know," he said. "You don't," she said. "You cannot possibly know. You were not there. You were not there for any of it. Not the pregnancy, not the labor, not the nights I couldn't—" She shut herself down again, pressed her lips together, looked at a point past his left shoulder, and breathed twice before trusting herself to continue. "You made it very clear what I was to you. When you sat across from me in that conference room and checked your phone, while your attorneys made sure I'd walk away with nothing. Yes, he said. So don't stand here and tell me. I'm not telling you anything, he said. I came here to tell you that I didn't know. That's all. I came here to tell you that. He stopped. His hands came out of his pockets. He looked for a fraction of a second like a man with no prepared response, which was an expression she was not certain she had ever seen on his face in 3 years of marriage. I went to the park. Everything stopped. What? She said. 2 days ago, Saturday. The park in Astoria. The one near your building. I didn't approach. I was on the far end. He stopped. He looked at the floor, at his own hands, with the expression of a man assembling words for something he has never put into words before. She was throwing leaves. The image arrived in Serena's mind with horrible, involuntary precision. The park on Saturday, the amber afternoon light, Luna's specific delight at the phenomenon of leaves falling, which had kept her occupied for the better part of 40 minutes, while Serena sat on the bench with coffee going cold in her hand. You watched my daughter, Serena said. Very quiet, very controlled. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. From a distance that you thought I wouldn't. Yes, he said. I know. I'm not defending it. I needed to see her before I decided anything, before I said anything to you. You needed to see her. The control was fraying at the edges now. She could feel it. You needed to see her. You, who checked your phone while we signed away our marriage. You, who had your attorneys make sure I left with nothing. And I mean nothing. Not a single... And now you needed to see her. Her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, which was, she had learned, the most dangerous register she had. Quieter meant the feeling was larger. What exactly are you deciding, Minjai? What is it you think you're going to decide about my daughter? I don't want to take anything from you, he said immediately. His voice was very careful. I'm not going to use lawyers. I'm not going to use any of it. I'm not coming at you with resources. I know what that would look like, and I know that I don't have the right. You don't? I know. You have no rights here. I know that too. She looked at him for a long time, long enough to search for the angle, the strategy, the move underneath the move that was the vocabulary she associated with how he operated in the world. She looked, and the thing she found, which was worse, in some ways, than what she'd been looking for, was just a man standing in a hotel ballroom holding something terrible with both hands. I need to know one thing, she said. He waited. Why did you investigate me? I understand you recognized my name on the contract, but you were done with me. I was filed and closed. You had moved on. So why, when I walked into your conference room, did you call someone that same night and ask for everything? The silence lasted 3 seconds. Because I never stopped, he said. She looked at him. I tried, he said. I filed it, and I closed it, and I told myself I had done what I had to do. And the first time I was in the same room with you in 3 years, I understood immediately that I had been lying to myself the entire time. Serena took a step back. Not dramatic, just physical, a recalibration of the distance between them, as if the words needed more space than what she'd left. She thought about 600 things. She thought about her daughter throwing leaves in amber afternoon light with his eyes and her smile. She thought about every morning she'd started at 5:15. She thought about something she had promised herself, in a bathroom with a positive pregnancy test, standing at a sink, that she was done organizing her life around. Fear. She had promised herself she was done with fear, but this was not fear. This was something more complicated. This was the specific, vertiginous sensation of a future she had carefully mapped, beginning to shift at its edges, in ways she could not fully trace, and the shift was coming from the one direction she had built the whole map to exclude. She picked up her tablet. The event is in 6 weeks, she said. I'm going to deliver it exactly as contracted. I'm going to do my job, and I expect you to let me do my job, and I expect all communication to go through Joanna Park's office. He nodded. We are not having this conversation again until after the event. He nodded again. And if you go within 2 blocks of that park, she said, without my explicit knowledge and consent, we're done. The contract, this conversation, any version of whatever you think this is, done. Do you understand? Yes, he said. She walked past him toward the ballroom door. His proximity as she passed him, 3 feet, close enough to catch the specific scent she had somehow, stupidly, idiotically, still retained in some archive of her nervous system, did something she refused to acknowledge. She kept walking. She was in the elevator, alone, descending, when her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. A text with no name attached, just 4 words. I have a daughter. She stared at it. Her hand was not shaking. Her hand was not shaking. The elevator opened onto the lobby, and she walked through the revolving glass doors into the cold November air. And she did not look at the message again, but she did not delete it either. And when she got to the car, she sat in the driver's seat for a full minute with her hands on the wheel before she started the engine. 6 weeks. She could hold this for 6 weeks. She had held harder things for longer. She started the car. What she did not know, as she merged onto the avenue and the hotel disappeared in her rear-view mirror, was that David Seo, who had run the investigation and delivered the photographs, had also flagged something in his preliminary sweep that he had considered, at the time, too uncertain to include in the report. A pattern in financial transactions adjacent to a logistics company connected to one of Min Jae's port operations, a name that had appeared twice in documents adjacent to Velvet Crown's corporate filings. The kind of coincidence that David, in 7 years of work, had learned was never a coincidence. He had flagged it. He was waiting for verification. The verification arrived in his inbox at 11:15 that same night. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Min Jae. We have a problem, David said. Min Jae, who was still in the hotel parking structure, sitting in the back of his car going nowhere, said, Tell me. Someone has been watching Velvet Crown since before the Axiom contract came through, David said. Not you, someone else. And whoever it is, they're connected to Marco Tien's operation on the east side. The name landed like a stone in still water. Marco Tien, who had been trying to find leverage against Min Jae's organization for 14 months, who had failed 3 times, who was not, by any intelligence Min Jae had accumulated, the kind of man who stopped trying. How connected? Min Jae said. Connected enough that I think they put the contract in front of you on purpose, David said. I think they wanted her in your building. I think they wanted you distracted. The car was very quiet. And if I'm distracted, Min Jae said slowly, then you're not watching what you should be watching, David said, and neither is she. Min Jae looked out the window of the car at the concrete wall of the parking structure. She doesn't know, he said. No, David said. She has no idea. Min Jae closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. Find out everything, he said, tonight. And the thing that had been simple, difficult, yes, painful, yes, but at least simple in its difficulty, became something else entirely. Became something with edges he could not yet fully see, moving in directions he had not prepared for, threatening something he had only just, standing in a half-lit ballroom, understood that he could not afford to lose. David's verification came in 3 files. Min Jae read them at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the kind of focused stillness that people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for calm. It was not calm. It was the specific quality of attention he brought to things that required him to see clearly before he moved, the way you hold very still when the ground under you might not hold. The first file was financial. A series of shell transactions, 3 layers deep, connecting a logistics consulting firm called Meridian Advisory Group to both Marco Tien's East Side operation and more recently to a vendor account that had been active in Velvet Crown's early contracting period. Not direct. Nothing this kind of operation ever did was direct. But David had mapped it thoroughly, with annotation, and the map said what it said. The second file was surveillance. Photographs and movement logs showing a man named Curtis Bale, mid-level in Tien's organization, primarily used for information gathering and soft pressure operations. In the vicinity of Velvet Crown's Midtown office on 4 separate occasions over the past 3 months. Never inside. Never making contact. Just present, in the way that a problem is present before it announces itself. The third file was the one that made Min Jae set down the glass of water he hadn't been drinking and sit very still for a long time. It was a conversation log, partially reconstructed from a source David had inside Tien's network. a source whose information had been reliable enough 3 times before to act on. The conversation was between Tien and someone identified only as an internal reference number, and it had taken place 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks before the Axiom contract inquiry had been routed to Velvet Crown's email. The gist of it, as David had annotated, was this. Someone inside Axiom Group's corporate events procurement chain had been paid to ensure that the vendor shortlist for the AGI Horizon launch was built around Velvet Crown events specifically. Not because Tien had any interest in the event itself, because Tien knew, from sources Minji had not yet identified, that Serena Vega was the woman Min Jae had divorced 3 years ago. And Tien had calculated, correctly as it turned out, that placing her back in Min Jae's immediate orbit at a critical operational period would produce exactly the kind of distraction that had, in the past 14 months, been the one thing Tien had been unable to manufacture. Min Jae sat with this for 5 minutes. Then he called David. "The source inside procurement," he said. "How deep does it go?" "One person, administrative level. She's been managed through Meridian, probably doesn't know who's actually running her. Standard cutout structure. And Tien knows I've seen Serena. He has to assume it. The contract meeting was on the calendar. It wasn't hidden. So he's waiting to see what I do." "That's my read," David said. "If you pull back from the contract, he knows the distraction worked, and he has time to move on whatever he's been building. If you stay engaged, he watches me stay distracted," Min Jae said. "Yes." Min Jae looked at the third file, still open on the table, at the reference number that stood in for whoever had given Tien the information about Serena in the first place. The internal source, the one who told Tien about my history with her. "Still working on that," David said. "It's someone close. The level of detail in what Tien has, it's not from external research. Someone talked. Someone in my organization talked." Yes. The words sat between them on the phone line like something that needed to be picked up carefully. "Keep going," Min Jae said. "I want the name." He ended the call and sat for another minute. Then he closed the files, went to his bedroom, and lay down fully dressed on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling for 2 hours without sleeping. He thought about what Tien was actually building while Min Jae had spent the past week thinking about a park in Astoria and a little girl throwing leaves and a woman who had looked at him in a half-lit ballroom with more controlled fury than anyone had directed at him in a decade. He thought about the fact that Serena had no idea any of this existed. She was executing a corporate event contract in good faith, managing her business, picking up her daughter at 5:30, going about the life she had built, and she was doing all of it inside a situation that had been constructed around her without her knowledge, for purposes that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with him. He thought about what it meant that she was exposed and didn't know it. He thought about what it meant that he was the reason she was exposed. At 4:15 in the morning, he made a decision. He was going to tell her. Not because it was strategically optimal, not because it was the correct move in whatever game Tien was running, because she was walking through a minefield in the dark and he had the map, and choosing to keep it because the conversation would be difficult was not something he was able to do, not with what he now knew was walking around in a park in Astoria with his eyes. He would tell her, but first he needed the name of the person who had talked. David delivered it at 8:17 the next morning in a single text message. Min Jae read the name, and the ground shifted in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or Tien or the minefield that Serena was walking through. The name was James Ko. James Ko, who had been Min Jae's operations director for 6 years, who had been in the room for board discussions, restructuring decisions, sensitive personnel conversations, who knew, because he had been present during the period of the divorce, the full context of Min Jae's marriage and the circumstances of its end. Who had been present, Min Jae ran back through the specific memory with the focus of a man who needs to know exactly when the floor started giving way. At a private dinner 8 months ago, where Min Jae had said, with the loose candor of a man who believed he was among people he trusted, that the only mistake that had stayed with him was the marriage, that he had handled it wrong, that he had sometimes wondered. James had been sitting 2 seats to his left. Min Jae called him at 8:35. James picked up on the second ring in the easy, unhurried way of a man with no reason to expect what was coming. "Morning. You're in early." "Come to my office," Min Jae said. "Now." A pause. brief but present. I've got the Meridian debrief at 9. Now, James. Min-jae hung up. He had James's badge access suspended from his desk before James reached the 45th floor. Not to trap him, but because he wanted no part of the next conversation to be administrative. He wanted it to be clean. He stood at the window when James came in, and he did not turn around immediately, and the silence of the office in those first 10 seconds was the kind of silence that told James, who was not a stupid man, he would not have been useful if he were a stupid man, exactly how much Min-jae already knew. "Close the door," Min-jae said. James closed it. Min-jae heard him do it and heard the quality of how he did it, carefully, which told him everything about the posture James was going to take. He turned around. James was 51, compact, precise in his presentation the way that men who came from less and built themselves into something tended to be precise. He was standing 2 feet inside the door with his hands loose at his sides and his face set in the specific neutrality of someone deciding, in real time, how much to concede. "Marco Tien," Min-jae said. James looked at him. "How long?" Min-jae said. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Min-jae counted. 8 months, James said. Min-jae absorbed this. 8 months? The dinner. Of course. "What did he offer you?" "Protection," James said. "For my family. My brother's operation in—" "I don't need the details," Min-jae said. "I need to understand what you gave him." "Operational calendars. Procurement access codes. General intelligence on your—" James stopped. His jaw moved. "On your personal history. The divorce. The woman." "Her name," Min-jae said. Very quiet. "I gave him her name, the business name, the address." James looked at him steadily. It was the look of a man who had already crossed the line far enough back that contrition was no longer the operating calculation. He said he wasn't going to touch her, that she was just a pressure mechanism. You believed him," Min-jae said. "I needed to believe him." "And what do you think he's planning to do with a woman who has no idea she's been put in the middle of this?" James said nothing. Min-jae moved away from the window. He crossed the office to his desk and placed both hands flat on the surface, not in anger. Something past anger, something that had burned through anger and come out the other side as a different temperature entirely. 6 years, he said. "Yes." 6 years, and you decided that what he was offering was worth more than— He stopped himself, took one breath. "Did you know about the child?" Something moved across James's face. Not guilt exactly, the specific expression of someone who has been compartmentalizing and has just been asked to stop. "I knew she was pregnant when the divorce was finalized," he said. Min-jae looked at him. "I found out about 8 months after the fact," James said, "from a source in the Heights. I didn't—" He stopped again. "I didn't tell you because by then it was done. She'd gone. I thought it was better." "You thought it was better," Min-jae said. You thought it was better for you," Min-jae said. "You thought that I would be difficult to manage if I knew. You thought it complicated your position." James didn't answer, which was its own answer. Min-jae straightened up. He looked at James for a long moment, at a man he had trusted with the operational architecture of his organization for 6 years, at a face he knew as well as most faces he'd spent time with, and he felt the specific cold clarity that came when something he had believed to be solid revealed its hollow interior. He'd felt it twice before in his life. Once with his father. Once on a day in October 3 years ago in a conference room, sitting across from a woman he had treated like a transaction, when something in her face had told him, briefly, quickly, suppressible, that he was making a mistake he wouldn't be able to take back. He hadn't listened then either. "Call security on your way out," Min-jae said. "They'll walk you through the exit process." James looked at him. "Min-jae?" "Don't," Min-jae said. One word, final. James left. Min-jae stood in the office for 4 minutes. Then he called Joanna Park and told her to clear his afternoon. Then he called David and told him to escalate the Tien surveillance to full active monitoring and to begin identifying what Tien was actually building, because the distraction play was cover for something else, and he needed to know what. Then he got his coat. He drove to Velvet Crown's office in Midtown himself, which was something he did not do. He had a driver. used him consistently, the car being one of the few spaces in his daily life that functioned as a buffer between the always-on quality of running his world and the inside of his own head. He drove himself because he needed the 12 minutes to think about how to say this. He didn't figure it out in 12 minutes. He went in anyway. The Velvet Crown office was not what he had imagined, though he hadn't spent significant time imagining it. It was a converted loft space on the 4th floor of a building on West 38th, bright and organized in the way that creative operational spaces get organized when the person running them has a specific standard for how things should function. There were mood boards and fabric samples and a long work table covered in event layouts, and it smelled like coffee and fresh flowers from a reference arrangement sitting near the entrance. And there were 3 people visible from the door who all looked up when he walked in with the particular collective expression of people who recognized him and were unsure what the protocol was for this. "Is she here?" he said. One of them, a young woman, dark hair, efficient posture, stood up. "She's on a call. I'll wait." He waited 4 minutes, standing, not looking at his phone, until the office door at the back opened and Serena came out mid-sentence on a call and saw him and stopped. The person on the phone continued talking for 3 seconds before her silence prompted them to stop. "Let me call you back," she said, and hung up, and looked at him with an expression that moved from surprise through something he couldn't name and settled into the controlled, professional surface she'd used in the ballroom. "This is my office." "I know." "You can't just—" "I need to talk to you," he said. "Now. Not through Joanna, not about the event. I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it today." She looked at him. At his face, specifically. She was reading him, he understood, in the way she always had, with the quiet attentiveness that he had never sufficiently registered when he had the chance, the specific intelligence of a woman who watched carefully and understood more than she indicated. Whatever she saw made her say, "My office." She closed the door behind them. He told her. He told her about David's investigation, about the Shell transactions, about Curtis Bale outside her building, about the source inside procurement who had been paid to put Velvet Crown on the short list. He watched her face as he told her, and kept his own account precise and unemotional because she deserved precision and because his own emotions about it were not what was relevant. When he got to Tien's name, she didn't react in recognition, which confirmed she had no context for that world. When he told her that the contract had been constructed around her specifically as a mechanism to distract and destabilize him, her face did something complicated that she quickly controlled. When he told her that the person who had given Tien her name was someone inside his own organization, someone who had known about the divorce, her jaw tightened. "Your people exposed me," she said. "Yes. And my daughter." David has nothing indicating Tien has specific interest in Luna. The exposure was, "My daughter," she said again. The word was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, and it landed with more weight than volume would have carried. "Someone in your world gave out my daughter's address to a man who runs—" She stopped, pressed both hands flat on her desk. "Because you and I have a history." "Yes." "Because being connected to you," she said, "even on paper, even through a vendor contract, makes me a variable in something I have never agreed to be part of." He had nothing to say to this that was not an admission. "I'm going to ask you one thing," she said, "and I need a completely honest answer." "Yes." "Is Luna in danger?" "Not currently," he said. David's assessment is that Tien is using the situation for operational distraction, not direct action. "But I want to put protection on your building. Not visible, not—" "No," she said. "Serena, you don't put anything near my daughter without my consent. That's not a negotiation." "Then tell me what you want," he said. "Tell me what you need and I'll do it." She looked at him, at his face, at his hands on the arm of the chair, at the specific controlled quality of a man who was offering her something that was not leverage, not strategy, but the only thing he actually had available, information and resources she hadn't asked for and didn't want, for a problem she had been put in without her knowledge. "I need," she said slowly, "to understand how bad this actually is. Not your version of how bad it is. The real version. Because you have spent years running an organization that hurts people as a standard operational function, and I need to know what not currently in danger means when you're the one assessing it." He looked at her. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Not the managed version, the actual truth." And he told her. He told her about Tien's operation, its scope, its methods, the specific quality of threat it represented. He told her without softening it because she had asked for the truth, and giving her the managed version would be exactly the kind of thing he had been doing, in various forms, for their entire relationship. He watched her face as he spoke, and watched her absorb it, and watched something shift in her eyes as the actual landscape of it became clear. Not panic, not the collapse he might have expected from someone outside this world, but a specific, precise fear of the kind that a genuinely intelligent person feels when they understand a danger accurately for the first time. When he finished, the office was very quiet. "I need you to get out," she said. He stood. "I mean, out of my office," she said, "and I need an hour, 1 hour. Then I'll call you." He nodded. He was at the door when she said, "Min-jae?" He turned. "The person in your organization who gave out my information," she said. "Who was it?" A beat. "James Coe," he said. Her eyes held his. "Did you know he knew about the pregnancy?" she said. "Before today." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I found out this morning." She nodded once, looked at her desk. "Go," she said. He went. He was in the lobby of her building, standing near the entrance, not fully having decided where to go next, when his phone rang. Not David, not Joanna. A number he recognized as belonging to one of his port operation managers, a man named Ray, who called him only when there was no other option. He picked up. "We have a problem at the Greenpoint facility," Ray said. He sounded controlled in the way that people sounded controlled when the situation they were describing was not. "Someone got in last night. They pulled records." Min-jae's jaw tightened. "What records?" "The transit manifest for the last quarter," Ray said, "and the personnel files." Min-jae understood immediately and completely what this meant. The transit manifests were the operational core of the port logistics. They contained routes, schedules, the infrastructure of movement that the entire Eastern network ran on. In the right hands, they were a roadmap. In Marco Tien's hands, they were a weapon. "How long ago?" he said. "We found it an hour ago. The breach was—" Ray paused. "The access was internal, Min-jae. Someone with clearance." "James Coe had facility clearance," Min-jae said. Silence for 2 seconds. "Yes," Ray said. Min-jae closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. "Lock the facility," he said. "Full protocol. Call no one else until I get there." He ended the call. He looked at the elevator. Serena was on the 4th floor with an hour he'd promised her, and a child in a daycare center in Astoria, and a situation that had just changed in scope from dangerous to something that required a word he didn't have time to locate right now. Because if Tien had the manifests, he had the routes. And if he had the routes, he had leverage over every operation Min-jae ran on the eastern seaboard. And if he had that leverage, he didn't need the distraction anymore. Which meant Serena had served her purpose. Which meant the calculus around her safety had just changed completely. Min-jae was moving before the thought finished forming, back through the lobby toward the elevator, phone already up, calling David with the other hand. David picked up in one ring. "Tien has the manifests," Min-jae said. "Greenpoint breach, last night, internal access. James gave him the clearance codes before I cut him this morning. I need eyes on Serena right now. Do not let her leave that building alone." "I've got 2 people 3 blocks out," David said. "Already moving, already shifting assets." "On them now." "Her daughter," Min-jae said. "The daycare." "Address is in the file. Sending someone." "Quietly," Min-jae said. "Nothing that looks like—" "I know how to do this," David said, and hung up. The elevator opened. Min-jae stepped in and rode it to 4 and walked through the Velvet Crown office without stopping, past the assistant who started to stand, past the work table and the mood boards and the coffee smell, to the closed office door at the back, and knocked twice and opened it. Serena was at her desk with her phone in her hand and an expression that told him the hour wasn't up and she was aware. "The situation changed," he said. She looked at him, at his face. Whatever she read there made her put the phone down. "How?" He told her. Fast, clean, no softening. Tien had the manifests. James had given him facility access before Minji had cut him that morning, probably as a final delivery, the last thing owed. With the manifest, Tien had leverage over the Eastern operation. With that leverage, he no longer needed the distraction mechanism, which meant Serena had completed her function in his plan and was now, at best, irrelevant to him. At best, she said. At worst, Minjae said, he decides that the cleanest way to apply pressure to me directly is through something I've recently demonstrated I care about. The office was very still. He's been watching you, Serena said slowly. He watched you walk into that boardroom and react to me. He watched you go to the park. Yes. So he knows. He has to assume, Minjae said. And Tien operates on assumptions when the assumptions are good enough. She stood up, not frantically, with the specific, decisive motion of someone who has processed the information and is now in operational mode. Luna, she said, David has someone going to the daycare. Quietly, no uniforms, nothing that... I need to call them. She was already dialing. He watched her make the call. The daycare director, a brief conversation conducted in a voice that was controlled on the surface and cost her something underneath, asking that Luna not be released to anyone except Serena herself, no exceptions, she'd explain when she arrived. When she hung up, her hand stayed on the phone for a second. She's fine, Minjae said. She doesn't know anything is... She's two, Serena said. She's always fine. That's not... She stopped. What do you need from me? He looked at her. To deal with Tien, she said. What do you need? I need you somewhere safe while I... That's not an answer to the question I asked. He looked at her for a moment, at a woman who had spent 2 years building something from nothing, who had been put in danger by his world without her consent, who was standing in her own office asking him what he needed with the focused calm of someone who had decided to be useful rather than afraid. He thought about what 3 years ago had looked like, the woman who had floated in the current of his decisions, and he thought about what was standing in front of him now, and the distance between those two things was not something he had words for. The manifests, he said. Tien has copies, but the originals are still at Greenpoint. If I can get into that facility and pull the core routing files before he moves on them, I can reroute the entire Eastern network before his intel is current. His leverage becomes worthless. He has a map to roads that no longer go where he thinks. How long does that take? 6 hours? Maybe 8. And in those 6 hours... In those 6 hours, he said, I need you and Luna somewhere Tien can't find you, with people I trust while I deal with the facility. People you trust, she said. Your people. He understood the weight of that. His people. The same organizational category that had produced James Coe. David, he said. Only David. I'd trust him with... He stopped. I trust him. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Reading him. He let her read him. He had nothing left to manage for her benefit. One condition, she'd said. Name it. You come back, she said. Not softly. Flatly, with the specific tone of someone stating a logistical requirement. Whatever you're going to do at that facility, you come back from it, because my daughter is not going to grow up knowing her father existed for 3 weeks and then made a decision that got him killed. The sentence landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. Okay, he said. That's not good enough. I will come back, he said. She nodded once, picked up her bag. Let's go get my daughter. They moved. The next 40 minutes were operational and fast. David met them outside with a car and a route to the daycare that avoided the 2 blocks where his surveillance had clocked Tien's people in the past week. The daycare pickup was clean. Luna came out in a small red coat with a drawing she wanted to show Serena immediately. A house with what appeared to be a large yellow circle above it that Luna identified as the moon. And she was so entirely herself, so fully occupying her own oblivious world, that Serena's breath caught for just a second before she lifted her and held her against her chest and said, I see it, baby. I see it, with her face pressed into Luna's hair. Minjae stood 6 feet away on the sidewalk and watched his daughter for the second time. Not from across a park. 3 feet. The red coat and the drawing and the serious gray eyes and the way she looked over her mother's shoulder at him with the specific focused assessment of a small person encountering an unfamiliar adult and deciding what to make of them. She looked at him. He looked at her. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't do anything that might startle her. He just stood there and took it. The full weight of what looking at her actually felt like from 3 feet, which was nothing like what he'd prepared for and everything he'd deserved to miss. Luna pointed at him. "Who's that?" she said to Serena. Serena pulled back enough to look at her daughter's face. A beat. "Someone Mommy works with," she said. Luna considered this, looked at him again with the gray eyes. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Minjae said. Luna showed him the drawing, held it out, arm extended, offering it for review. "Moon," she said. "I see it," he said. His voice was completely level. He had no idea how. Luna appeared satisfied and tucked the drawing against her chest. Serena was watching him over Luna's shoulder with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something between pain and something else. Something that wasn't ready to be named yet. David cleared his throat from the car. "We need to move." They moved. The safe location was a building David maintained in Williamsburg. Not a safe house in the cinematic sense, just a clean, furnished apartment in a building with controlled access and a superintendent who worked for David and knew when to see nothing. Serena walked through it once, checked the locks, checked the windows, checked the lines of sight from the street, and said nothing except okay. Luna found a bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter and immediately began negotiating for an apple, which Serena gave her and which she ate with the methodical focus of a child who had priorities. Minjae stood near the door. He and Serena looked at each other across the apartment with Luna between them eating an apple on the kitchen floor, and the domestic geometry of it was so specifically not the context either of them was prepared for that there was, for a moment, almost something that might have been a different kind of feeling in different circumstances. "Go," Serena said. "David's number is... I have it. Go." He went. The Greenpoint facility was a commercial logistics hub, legitimate on the surface in the way that several of Minjae's port-adjacent operations were legitimate on the surface. Real work, real employees, real cargo, with layers beneath that only a handful of people knew how to read. He arrived with Ray and 2 men he trusted at the operational level, the kind of trust built over years of demonstrated reliability rather than proximity or affection, the only kind that had held up. The facility had been locked down per his orders. The security team had sealed the server room where the transit records were held. What they had not accounted for, what Minjae had not accounted for when he'd given the lockdown order from Serena's building lobby, was that James Coe had not only provided Tien with the access codes and the manifests. He had also told Tien about the lockdown order. Minjae understood this when they were 40 feet from the server room and Ray said, very quietly, "The door's been opened." The server room door was ajar. The lock had been bypassed cleanly, no damage, the kind of bypass that required specific knowledge of the system. Inside, the primary terminal was dark. The backup drives that housed the routing core were gone. Not the hardware, just the drives, pulled with the particular precision of someone who knew exactly which ones they needed. Minji stood in the doorway and looked at the empty drive bays. "When?" he said. "Had to be in the last 2 hours," Ray said. "Before the lockdown was fully implemented, someone was already inside." Minjae turned and looked at him. "Not my people," Ray said. Flat, certain. "James had facility codes," Minjae said. "He knew about the lockdown. He had 2 hours. If Tien already had someone inside before you called it in, then the lockdown just told them what to take," Minjae said. He walked out of the server room and stood in the facility corridor with the specific sensation of watching a door close that he had been trying to reach for an hour. Not panic. He did not panic, but a clean, cold understanding of what the next moves looked like from here, which was Tien had what he needed. The routing data was in his hands. Minjae's Eastern network was exposed in the specific way that exposed meant in this world. Not to law enforcement, not to legitimate oversight, but to a rival who now knew every route, every schedule, every vulnerability in the logistics architecture that had been built over 7 years. His phone buzzed. David. "Talk," Minjae said. "Tien moved," David said. 40 minutes ago. He's called a meeting. His people, 3 of the independent operators he's been cultivating on the south side, and a beat. And 2 people who work for you, portside managers. They're sitting in a room with Tien right now." Min-jae closed his eyes for 1 second. 2 of his own managers. Which meant the exposure wasn't just the manifests. It meant Tien had been working the internal structure longer and deeper than David had mapped. Which managers, Min-jae said. David told him. He processed this. He thought about what a meeting between Tien, independent operators, and 2 of his own port managers meant in terms of what Tien was actually trying to build. It was not a power play against the Eastern Network. It was a takeover architecture. Tien was not trying to leverage Min-jae into a negotiated disadvantage. He was trying to dismantle the Eastern operation and absorb it, piece by piece, using the manifests as the blueprint and the internal defectors as the infrastructure. It was, Min-jae thought with a clarity that had nothing pleasant in it, a genuinely good plan. "Where's the meeting?" Min-jae said. "A restaurant in Red Hook, private room, there. How many people does Tien have with him?" "My count from outside is 6, plus the 2 managers, plus Tien. Armed. Safe assumption." Min-jae looked at Ray. Ray was watching him with the face of a man who had worked long enough in this world to understand what a phone conversation looked like when the decision being made on it was irreversible. "I'm going to the meeting," Min-jae said. Ray didn't blink. "How many of us?" 3, Min-jae said. "We don't go in armed for a firefight. We go in to talk." "Tien doesn't want to talk. Tien wants the network," Min-jae said. "That means he needs me functional enough to negotiate the transition. He won't move on me in a room full of witnesses and business relationships. It's not his method." "You're betting on method," Ray said. "I'm betting on self-interest," Min-jae said. "It's more reliable." Ray looked at him for 1 more second. Then he said, "Cars outside." And they moved. Red Hook in late November was cold and gray and industrial in the specific way of waterfront neighborhoods that had been almost something for 2 decades without fully arriving. The restaurant was a narrow building on a street that dead-ended near the water, the kind of place with no sign and a single light above the door, and a purpose that had nothing to do with food. 2 of Tien's men were visible outside. They clocked Min-jae's car before it stopped, and one of them had a phone to his ear before the door opened. Min-jae stepped out. He was wearing his coat. His hands were visible. He walked toward the door at a pace that communicated exactly what he intended it to communicate. That he had come here on purpose, that he knew what room he was walking into, and that he had made his own calculation about it and found it acceptable. One of the men outside moved to block him. "Tell him I'm here," Min-jae said. A beat. Into the phone. Then the man stepped aside. Inside, the private room was in the back, past a narrow corridor and through a door that someone had propped open, the sounds of the meeting audible before he reached it. Tien's voice, even and unhurried, the voice of a man currently holding every card he expected to hold. Min-jae walked through the door. The room was not large. A table, 8 people around it, 2 of whom were his port managers who had the specific expression of men who had made a decision they could not unmake and were now confronting the fact that the person most affected by that decision had just walked through the door. Tien sat at the head of the table. Marco Tien was 56, lean in the way of a man who had never stopped moving, with gray at his temples and eyes that were light-colored and flat, in a way that Min-jae had always found more useful as information than any threat Tien had ever made verbally. He looked at Min-jae walking into his meeting, and something moved in those flat eyes. Not surprise exactly, but a recalculation, a small one. Tien had not expected this. Good, Min-jae thought. When a man doesn't expect you, the first 30 seconds belong to you. I was going to call you tomorrow, Tien said. I saved you the trouble, Min-jae said. He didn't look at his managers. Not yet. Can we talk privately? These are my people. And 2 of mine, Min-jae said. He let the flatness of it sit in the room. Which makes this a complicated room for a private conversation. But I'll work with what's here. Tien looked at him. Sit down, Min-jae. I'll stand. A beat. Tien nodded, fractionally, and the 6 men who weren't port managers or Tien shifted, not moving, but settling in the specific way of people who have been silently told to hold. You have my routing data, Min-jae said. I have a copy, Tien said. You have my facility access and 2 of my port operations people, and a meeting that was supposed to happen without me knowing about it until it was done. He paused. I'm telling you what you have so we start from the same understanding. Generous? Tian said. What I don't have, Min-jae said, is patience for the architecture you've been building around it. The shell transactions, the procurement plant, the woman. He kept his voice completely level. Using her was effective, I'll give you that. You got 6 weeks of my attention in the wrong direction while your people moved on the facility. Tian watched him. But she's done, Min-jae said. Whatever you think her ongoing value is, she's gone. She's out of the city as of tonight. Whatever leverage you think that direction gives you, it's closed. It was a lie. Luna's apple and the Williamsburg apartment and the specific weight of Serena saying come back. All of it, a lie delivered to the one person in the room who could use the truth as a weapon, and Min-jae held the lie in his face without a single tell. Tian looked at him for a long moment. The eastern routes, Tian said. I want managed access, shared scheduling on the 3 northern corridors, veto rights on competing cargo for Q1 and Q2. You restructure the port management team to include 2 of my people. No, Min-jae said. The room changed temperature. You're not in a position. I'm in the only position that matters, Min-jae said, because what you have is a copy of old data and 2 men who work for me and made a mistake they're currently regretting. He finally looked at his port managers. Both of them looked at the table. The routing data you pulled is the archive. The live system, the actual current routing architecture set, runs on a protocol that updates on a 72-hour cycle. The copy you have was already 18 hours old when your people pulled it. By the time you try to use it operationally, it'll be useless. Tian's jaw moved. A small movement. That's not something you verified before tonight, Min-jae said. Because you trusted James to know the system, and James hasn't worked the live protocol in 14 months. The silence in the room had a specific quality, the quality of a calculation being rerun. Min-jae watched Tian's face and saw the moment the recalculation landed. Not catastrophic. Tian was too controlled for catastrophic, but visible. Here's what I'm offering, Min-jae said. One time, the 2 managers leave with me tonight. We call the facility matter a business dispute, and you and I go back to the specific mutual non-interference that has kept both our operations functional for the past 4 years. Or you push. And I spend the next 6 months making every corridor you run significantly more expensive to operate. And we both lose money, and people, and time. And I will still be here at the end of it, because I have been here before, and you have not. Tian looked at him across the table. The room held its breath. And then Min-jae's phone rang. He would not have answered it. He would have let it go to voicemail, would have kept his eyes on Tian and held the moment and waited for the answer that he could see building behind those flat eyes. He would not have answered it except that the caller ID said David, and David had strict instructions about when to call during an active situation. And the instructions were only if the situation in Williamsburg had changed. He answered. Tell me, he said. They move faster than I calculated, David said. His voice was tight in a way Min-jae had heard exactly once before in 7 years. Someone went to the daycare before we got there. They were asking for the child. The director called Serena's phone when they wouldn't leave. I've got people there now, but... Is she safe? Min-jae said. His voice did not change, not in volume, not in register. He could feel every person in the room listening to him. Serena took Luna out of the apartment 20 minutes ago, David said. She made me. She said she needed something from the daycare. I thought it was... I lost them for 8 minutes, Min-jae. I have them now. They're in a car, moving. But Tien's people are... How many? 2 vehicles. They picked up Serena's trail when she left the building. They're 3 blocks behind her right now. Min-jae looked at Marco Tien. Tien looked back at him. And Min-jae understood, with complete, final clarity, that the lie he had told 30 seconds ago had been unnecessary because Tien had already known. Tien had known the entire time. The meeting, the manifest, the negotiation, all of it had been staged to get Min-jae into this room. While Tien's people moved on, the only thing that could make him stop fighting. He looked at Tien across the table and he said, very quietly, "Call them off." Tien looked at him with those flat, light-colored eyes and did not move. "Call them off," Min-jae said again. And the second time it was not quiet. It was the register underneath quiet. The one that came from a place that had nothing left to lose in the calculation, and every person in that room heard the difference and felt it in their individual spines. Sit down, Tien said. We finished the conversation. There is no conversation, Min-jae said. There is only you calling your people off the car with my daughter in it in the next 30 seconds, or I burn every corridor you run to the ground starting tonight, not 6 months from now. Tonight. I will absorb every loss, every operational setback, every cost of a full war, and I will spend the next 2 years making sure you have nothing left to build on. I have done this before. You know I have done this before. The room was not breathing. Tien looked at him for a long time, the flat eyes moving across Min-jae's face with the attention of a man taking a final measurement. Then Tien picked up his phone and made a call and said 2 words in Cantonese that Min-jae did not speak, but understood from the context of what happened in the next 30 seconds, which was his own phone buzzing with a text from David that said, "They're pulling back." Min-jae stood in the room for 3 more seconds, long enough to make the exit his own rather than a retreat. Then he said to his 2 port managers, without looking at either of them, "Get up." And they got up, and he walked out. Nobody in the room stopped him. In the car, moving, he called David before the door was fully closed. "Where is she?" "Still moving, heading toward the bridge. She's okay, Min-jae. Luna's okay. Tien's vehicle's turned off 2 minutes ago." "Stay on them." "On them." He told Ray to drive, and he sat in the back of the car, and for the first time in 4 hours, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of the last 4 hours, which was considerable, which sat on his chest like something structural and heavy. He thought about Tien's face in the moment before he made the call. The specific quality of the calculation happening behind those flat eyes, not retreat, not defeat, but a man deciding that the current play was spent and the next one would come from a different direction when Min-jae was less prepared and less motivated. It was not over. Men like Tien did not do over. But the immediate threat had folded, and the immediate threat was the only one that mattered right now. He found Serena at a gas station off the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. She had pulled over, hazards on, and was sitting in the driver's seat of a car she'd borrowed from David's apartment building's parking level with her hands in her lap and Luna asleep in the car seat in the back, tipped sideways against the restraint the way small children slept, total, boneless, without awareness of what had been happening around them for the past 3 hours. Min-jae got out of Ray's car and walked to the driver's side window. Serena looked up at him. Her face was not composed. For the first time in every interaction they had had across 3 years of marriage and 3 more years of distance and 2 weeks of proximity, her face was not doing the managed thing. It was just her face, without the architecture she normally kept over it. And what was there was exhaustion and adrenaline and the specific aftermath expression of a woman who had spent 3 hours being afraid for her child and was now sitting in the bright fluorescent wash of a gas station letting it land. He opened the door. She didn't say anything. He crouched down to her level, which put him below her eye line, and he looked at her and said, "It's done. They're off you. You're both safe." She inhaled, slowly, let it out. "I lost David," she said. "I shouldn't have left the apartment. He told me to stay and I—" She stopped. "I panicked. When the daycare called and said someone had been there asking about Luna, I stopped thinking, and I moved." "You kept her safe," he said. "I drove around Brooklyn for 40 minutes not knowing where I was going." "And you kept her safe," he said again. She looked at him. At his face at close range in the gas station light, which was not flattering light for anyone and which revealed him as what he currently was. A man who had spent 4 hours in a situation that had required him to be several things he was not proud of, and one thing he was, which was present, which was fighting for something that mattered. "The meeting with Tien," she said, "handled." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have tonight," he said. "I will tell you everything, all of it, not in a gas station parking lot with Luna asleep in the back seat." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded. They drove back to the Williamsburg apartment in a small convoy, Ray ahead, Min-jae's car behind, David's vehicle joining at the bridge. And the ride was 20 minutes, and Luna slept through all of it, and Serena drove without speaking, and Min-jae sat in the passenger seat she'd let him take without comment and watched the city go by and thought about the particular quality of what it felt like to be in a car with his daughter's breathing audible from the back seat. He didn't have language for it. He didn't try to find language for it. He just let it be what it was. Back in the apartment, Serena put Luna to bed in the room with the single twin mattress that David had set up, tucking her in with the coat still half on, because Luna had not fully woken and Serena was not going to risk waking her fully by removing it. She stood at the door of the room for a moment after, her back to Min Jae, her hand still on the doorframe. Then she turned around and walked to the kitchen and put on water for coffee that neither of them would necessarily drink, because it was something to do with her hands, and Min Jae sat at the kitchen table and waited. The full account took 40 minutes. He told her everything: Tien's complete operation as David had mapped it, James Coe's role across 8 months of active cooperation with a rival organization, the manifests and the facility breach, and what Tien had actually been trying to build, which was not just leverage but absorption, a systematic dismantling. He told her about the meeting in Red Hook and what he had said to get Tien to call off the vehicles, which was a threat he had meant entirely and would have followed through on entirely, and which had cost him operationally in ways he was still calculating. He told her about the 2 port managers who had been sitting in that room, whose names he gave her, and whose roles he explained because she deserved the full picture of how deep the internal compromise had gone. She listened without interrupting. She was good at listening. She had always been good at listening, and he had not, in 3 years of marriage, sufficiently understood this as the specific intelligence it was, the ability to take in the full weight of a thing before responding to it. When he finished, the coffee was cold. James knew about the pregnancy, she said. For almost 3 years. Yes. He knew, and he stayed in your organization, and he used the information as currency with a man who was working against you. Yes. She looked at the table, at her own hands on it. I want to be angry about that, she said. I am angry about that, but I also... She stopped. I spent 3 years not telling you. I made that choice. It wasn't James's information to give, and it wasn't James's choice to make, but the reason he had it in the first place was because I decided that you didn't get to know. Min Jae looked at her. I'm not saying I was wrong, she said. I have thought about that choice from every angle for 3 years, and I still think I was protecting her. I still think what I knew about your world, what tonight just demonstrated very specifically about your world, was a legitimate reason to keep her out of it. It was, he said. She looked at him. Don't agree with me too fast. I'm not agreeing fast, he said. I've been sitting with it since the park photograph. Since I understood what it actually meant, not just that you'd kept her from me, but why. What the calculation looked like from your side. What you knew about the kind of environment you'd be putting her in. He paused. Tonight is a fairly complete argument for your position. Tonight is a fairly complete argument for a lot of things, she said. The kitchen was quiet. From down the hall, the small sounds of a sleeping child, the particular rhythm of Luna's breathing that Serena had learned over 2 years, and that was now, in this apartment, audible to both of them. Min Jae heard it and said nothing, and Serena watched his face hear it. What happens to Tien? She said. Tonight bought time, he said. He pulled back because a full war is expensive and because I gave him a face-saving exit. He'll regroup. He'll try something else in 6 months or a year, from a direction I don't fully anticipate. That's the nature of it. So it's not over. It's not the kind of thing that ends, he said. It changes shape. I've spent 15 years managing it, and I will spend the next 15 managing it differently, and some of the time I will manage it well, and some of the time situations like tonight will happen. He looked at her directly. I'm not going to tell you that changes. I'm not going to make that promise because I can't keep it, and you would know I couldn't keep it, and we would both know that I was choosing the version of the truth you wanted over the actual truth, and I am done doing that. Serena looked at him for a long time. That's the first time, she said, in everything I've known about you, that you've said something I fully believed. The words landed and stayed. I know, he said. 3 years of marriage, she said. I spent 3 years trying to believe the version of you that you were willing to show me. The private jets and the lavish gestures and the promises. And every time I felt the distance, I told myself it was the stress of what he's managing. It's the weight of what he carries. He loves me in a way that doesn't always look like love from the outside, but that's still love. She wasn't raising her voice. She was doing the opposite, pulling the words from somewhere deep and central, each one with its full weight behind it. And then you sat across from me in that conference room and checked your phone, and I finally understood that I had never been real to you. I was an arrangement. I was a version of a life that looked correct. Yes, he said. And now you're sitting in my kitchen telling me you've changed. I'm sitting in your kitchen telling you the truth, he said, which is that I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I'm not going to use what happened tonight as the reason you should trust me. I'm not going to use Luna as leverage for a relationship with you that you haven't chosen. I'm telling you the truth because you deserve it. And because I have spent 3 years understanding, in the specific way you only understand things when they're gone, what I had and what I chose over it. Serena looked at him. The gas station exhaustion was still on her face, the adrenaline still in her posture, and underneath all of it was something else. Something older and more complicated than tonight. The specific residue of a love that had not been cared for properly and had transformed over 3 years into something harder and more guarded. But that had not. She was understanding in this kitchen with the coffee, cold, and her daughter breathing down the hall, entirely become something else. I need time, she said. I know. A lot of time, not weeks. I don't know how much time. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know if I'm capable of... You don't have to know tonight, he said. You don't have to know this month. But Luna, she said. Luna is your daughter, he said. Whatever happens between you and me, whatever you decide, however long it takes, whatever you ultimately decide you can't do, that's separate. I want to know her. I want to be in her life if you'll let me. On your terms, on your timeline, through whatever channels you decide are acceptable. He paused. If you decide the answer is no, I'll spend the rest of my life being the reason she never wanted for anything from a distance. That's not a threat. That's not manipulation. That's just what's left if this is all there is. Serena's jaw tightened. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and there was a moment, brief, visible, quickly controlled, where the thing she was holding moved close enough to the surface to show. You don't get to be noble, she said, not unkindly. I don't have anywhere to put that right now. Okay, he said. Ask me again in 6 months, she said. Not about us, about Luna. Come back in 6 months and ask me again, and I'll have an answer. Okay, he said. She finally looked up. And you're not going to show up at the park, she said, not without your knowledge. Not at all, she said. Not until I say. Not at all, he agreed. The water she'd put on had long gone cold. She stood and moved to the sink and poured it out and stood there for a moment with her back to him, her hands on the edge of the counter, and he watched her breathe, in, out, the specific rhythm of someone setting something down that they have been carrying a long time. Then she said, the event. He blinked. The AGI Horizon launch, she said. 6 weeks. I am going to deliver it exactly as contracted. I did not build Velvet Crown to walk away from the biggest contract in its history because my personal life got complicated. She turned around. I need you to make sure the procurement issue is addressed so there's no blowback on my company from Tien's plant inside your team. He looked at her. The woman who was paid to put us on the short list, Serena said. She needs to be handled cleanly, not harmed, managed. She was being used by people above her, and I won't have her career destroyed over it. But the connection to Tien has to be severed and documented, so if anyone ever looks at how Velvet Crown got this contract, the record is clean. I'll have David handle it, he said. I want confirmation. You'll have it. She nodded, then she picked up the cold coffee mug, looked at it, set it back down. You should go. Luna will be up early and I need to sleep, and I need to think, and I need you not to be in this apartment when I do either of those things. He stood. He was at the door when she said his name. He turned. She was standing at the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, not defensively, just holding herself, the way people did when they were tired and the situation no longer required them to hold themselves for anyone else's benefit. She looked like herself, the most herself he had ever seen her look, which was a thing he understood he should have known how to see 3 years ago and hadn't, and which he was seeing now at the price that seeing it had cost both of them. For what it's worth, she said, I think you would have followed through at the meeting. I think you would have burned it all down. He looked at her. That's not a compliment, she said. And it's not a condemnation. It's just, I think it's true. And I think it matters that you would have done it for her and not for leverage or strategy or any of the other reasons you do things. She paused. I think that matters. He stood in the doorway and held this. The full weight of what she was telling him, which was not forgiveness, and was not an opening, and was not a promise of anything except that she had seen something, and was telling him honestly that she'd seen it, which was more than he had given her in 3 years of marriage, and more than he had earned in 2 weeks of disaster. "Thank you," he said. He meant it in ways he didn't have language for. He left. The AGI Horizon launch happened on a Friday evening in the 3rd week of December, and it was, by every available measure, spectacular. The ballroom had been transformed according to Serena's original concept. Clean architectural lines, warm light pooled precisely where it was needed. The brand installation at the far end of the room creating the exact sightline she had corrected on her second site visit, drawing the eye of every person who walked through the door. The catering was flawless. The entertainment calibrated to the demographic in a way that felt organic rather than calculated. The press logistics running on the minute-by-minute schedule that Paula had refined over 6 weeks of preparation. 800 guests moved through the space with the ease of people who had been made to feel comfortable without being able to identify exactly how or by whom. Joanna Park found Serena at 9:30 with an expression of genuine satisfaction and said, "This is exactly what we needed." And Serena said, "Good," and meant it simply, without the complicated freight that many of the sentences in her recent life had been forced to carry. Min-jae was there. He was there because it was his company's event, and he was its executive chairman, and there was no operational reason for him not to be. He moved through the room doing the things that men in his position did at these events. Brief conversations, handshakes, the specific social performance of a powerful figure who is present without being consuming, who makes the room feel attended to without dominating it. He and Serena were in the same room for 4 hours. They spoke once, briefly, when the program transitioned from dinner to the brand presentation, and Serena moved through the edge of the room to check the installation sightline and found him standing at the point she was heading for, looking at exactly what she'd come to look at. "The angle's right," he said, without preamble. "I know," she said. They stood there for 3 seconds, side by side, looking at the installation that she had conceived and built, and he had, in a secondary and complicated way, made possible. And the city was visible beyond the ballroom windows in the cold December dark, and neither of them said anything further. Then she moved back into the room to do her job, and he moved back into the room to do his, and the evening continued. When it was over, when the last guest had gone, and the staff were moving through the reset, and Paola was coordinating the breakdown with the focus of someone who had been waiting to do this part all night, Serena stood at the ballroom entrance for a moment alone and looked at what was left of the room. The specific aftermath of a successful event, displaced chairs and moved glasses, and the residual warmth of 800 people who had been somewhere and were now elsewhere, and the thing that had been built for them still holding its shape in the empty air. She had built this. From a diner in Morningside Heights with crackers in her apron pocket and a secret she was keeping and $1,700 in a separate account. From a birthday cake at 11:30 at night and a woman named Priya whose sister had cried. From 5:15 alarms and 2 trains and 6 blocks, and the understanding that the only way forward was through and through was the only direction she had. She had built this. The months that followed the launch moved in the way that recovery moves. Not linearly, not cleanly, but with the specific organic rhythm of something finding its new shape after significant damage. David's cleanup of the procurement connection was thorough, and as Minji had promised, carefully protective of the administrative-level woman who'd been used as Tien's instrument. She was quietly reassigned within the Axiom corporate structure, her record clean. The documentation of the Tien-connected interference was filed internally and would exist as protection for Velvet Crown if it was ever needed. James Coe disappeared from the industry in the way that people disappeared when the choice was that, or consequences that were worse. Min-jae did not elaborate on the specifics, and Serena did not ask. Tien regrouped, as Min-jae had said he would. There was movement on the south side 3 months later, a play against a different part of the network, handled without drama and without anyone outside the organization knowing it had happened. The shape of the threat changed. The threat did not end. Min-jae managed it, as he had said he would, differently, with more transparency about what he was managing, with a different calculation about what was worth protecting and at what cost, with the specific attention of a man who had understood late and expensively, that the thing he'd been managing toward had been sitting in a park, throwing leaves, and he'd been too occupied to see it. He started therapy in January. Serena found out from Danny, who had heard it from a mutual contact whose reliability she flagged with appropriate skepticism. And Serena sat with this information for 2 days before deciding that it was either true or it wasn't, and either way it was his to do or not do, and was not something she was going to factor into her timeline. Her timeline was her own. 6 months, she had said. The 6 months landed on a Sunday in late April, warm for the season, the kind of afternoon that arrived in New York 2 or 3 times a year, where the city seemed to remember that it was also a place where beauty was possible. Serena was at the park in Astoria, the same park, the one with the bench where she drank cold coffee and watched Luna examine leaves with a thoroughness that suggested the leaves had been insufficiently examined before. She had called him that morning, not to open something or close something, just to say, "The park, Sunday, 2 o'clock." He arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. She watched him cross the park toward them, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular quality of care in his posture that he wore now, instead of the old armor. Not softer exactly, but more deliberate, more aware of the weight of each step and what it was walking toward. Luna was at the edge of the sandbox. She looked up when he stopped at the bench. She had seen him twice since November. Once when Serena had allowed a brief, structured meeting at a coffee shop in January, 30 minutes, very careful, with Luna largely occupied by a piece of chocolate cake, and Min-jae mostly just watching her exist with an expression that Serena had not been able to look at directly for long. And once when he had dropped something off at the Astoria apartment, Luna's birthday had been in March, and the gift had been modest, intentionally so, a picture book about a girl who builds a garden on the moon, and Luna had asked Serena to read it 4 consecutive nights. Luna looked at him now with the specific evaluative attention she brought to things that required her to make up her mind. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Luna said. She held up a plastic shovel. "Digging." "I see that," he said. "You can help," Luna said, in the tone of someone conferring a significant honor. Min-jae looked at Serena. Serena looked at him. At his face, at what was in it, not performance, not strategy, not the managed composure that had been the dominant language of his face for all the years she'd known him. Just a man at the edge of a sandbox being offered a plastic shovel by his daughter, holding it with both hands and not pretending it was anything other than what it was. She sat down on the bench. "Go ahead," she said. He sat down in the sandbox. Luna handed him the shovel with the gravity of a professional handing over a specialized tool and began instructing him on the project, which was a whole of unclear ultimate purpose, but which required significant commitment and which she supervised with exacting attention. He dug. He asked questions about the project with the specific focused interest of someone who understood that the project mattered because she said it mattered. And Luna answered in the detailed and not entirely linear way of a 2-year-old for whom all explanations are equally complete, and Min-jae listened to every word. Serena watched from the bench. The afternoon light was the amber kind, low and warm, settling over the park in a way that made everything it touched look like something worth keeping. She thought about what she knew, which was this: that she did not have a clean answer to what came next, that trust was not a decision made once, but a practice undertaken daily and renegotiated continuously, that the wounds of the past were not gone and would not be gone, that 3 years of being someone's afterthought left marks that Sunday afternoons in April did not simply erase. She knew all of this. She also knew that the man sitting in her daughter's sandbox in a jacket that cost more than her first month's rent in the Bronx was doing the one thing she had spent 3 years of marriage wishing he could do, which was simply to be present. Not performing presence, not managing the impression of presence, just here, in the dirt, asking a 2-year-old where she wanted the hole to go. She also knew that she was a different person than the woman who had signed those papers, that what she had built in 3 years was not a consolation for what she'd lost, but something that existed on its own terms, with its own weight and value, and that any version of a future that included him would be built on that foundation. Hers, not his, hers first, or it would not be built at all. She was not afraid of that condition. She was not, she realized, sitting on the bench with cold coffee and her daughter's laugh moving across the April air, afraid of very much at all. Luna had determined that the hole was complete and had moved on to the next phase of the project, which appeared to involve transferring sand from one location to another for reasons of her own. And Minji had been repositioned by her small hands to a new corner of the sandbox and had gone without objection, and the expression on his face watching her work was the expression of a man who was exactly where he needed to be and knew it and was not going to waste a single minute of it. Serena took a sip of her coffee. "She's going to need a bath," she said. "I know," he said. "She's getting sand in your jacket." "I know," he said. He didn't look at the jacket. Serena looked at the sky above the park, at the particular gold of it, at the city's skyline held against it in the west, at the full and ordinary and specific beauty of an afternoon. That was simply what it was. Not a resolution, not a destination, not the end of anything, but a moment in a life that was continuing to build itself, one careful choice at a time, on the only foundation that had ever actually held. She put the coffee down. She looked at the man in the sandbox. She looked at her daughter. She said nothing. Some things didn't need to be said to be true. The afternoon held them all. The woman who had survived, the man who was learning what it cost to become worthy, and the small girl between them who had always been the point of all of it. And the light moved the way it does in late April, warm and unhurried, touching everything it reached and asking nothing back. There was no clean ending. There was only this, the next day and the one after it, and the work of being human in the presence of other humans, which was the hardest thing any of them would ever do. And they were doing it. That was enough.